Welcome to the Rumi Forum Luncheon Series in Washington, D.C. Today's discussion will be Muslim Americans, an in-depth analysis through Gallup polling. My name is Hazami Barmada, and I will be the moderator for today's luncheon series. We're honored to have with us today Ms. Dalia Mogahed. Thank you for being with us. Senior and Executive Director of the Gallup Center on Muslim Studies. Dalia, along with co-author Dr. John Esposito, has written the book, Who Speaks for Islam? What a Billion Muslims Really Think. Her analysis has appeared in a number of leading publications, including the Wall Street Journal, Foreign Policy Magazine, Harvard International Review, the Journal on Middle East Policy, and many other academic and popular journals. She also directs the Muslim West Facts Initiative through the Gallup poll, in collaboration with the Coexist Foundation, on disseminating the findings of the Gallup World Poll to key opinion leaders in the Muslim world and in the West. Thank you so much for being with us, Dalia.
It's my pleasure.
Looking
Thank
forward
you.
to this. In order to begin, could you give us some context on the Gallup poll's initiatives on researching the Muslim community?
Well, we have been doing a global poll for some time. So in 2005, we started polling the entire world. 95% of the globe's population is represented in our polling. And so we thought that with so much information, it would be important to get some depth around that much breadth. So we started different study centers. The pioneering one is the Center for Muslim Studies, which is what I direct. And that center is focused on understanding Muslim societies around the world by doing scientific survey research so that we're able to analyze and advise on what Muslims really think using this empirical tool.
Okay, well, I think the next question is, who are Muslim Americans?
That's a great question.
Who are we?
We did. Let me start by explaining how we polled Muslim Americans, because polling Muslim Americans is a incredibly difficult thing to do, despite what it may seem, because they are a tiny percentage of the overall population. And so what normally has to be done to poll Muslim Americans is to find Muslims where they are by looking at last names, by looking at census data around immigration records, because if you simply call up at random American households, you have to call up so many people in order to find someone who self-identifies as a Muslim. Now, there are some issues with finding Muslims specifically by using surnames and by using geographic concentrations, and that is, it's not entirely representative. So, for example, a Muslim with the name of, say, Keith Ellison might not make it into your sample. He doesn't have a Muslim-sounding last name. He doesn't live in a place where a lot of Muslims, necessarily are concentrated. So the gold standard is to call and call and call and call until you randomly find a Muslim, and you keep doing that until you have a big enough sample size. It's almost impossible to do it that way because it's cost prohibitive. Now, we actually at Gallup decided to do exactly that, the sort of almost crazy irrational way of trying to poll Muslim Americans, which is to call at random a representative sample of Americans and then find people who are self-identified as Muslims. And so the way we conducted our research is over 2008, for an entire year, we polled 1,000 American households a night. And by gathering such a large sample size, over 300,000 interviews, we were able to gather a large enough Muslim American sample size. And we just simply define Muslim Americans as American households whose respondent identifies as a Muslim. So that's how we did our research. And so it is truly the first ever nationally representative study of Muslim Americans, because it was done in this way. Not only did we do it by calling American households in this random representative way, but we also included cell phone only households. And that's another additional aspect of polling that you should ask about when you're hearing about polling is, did you include cell phone only households? Because more and more Americans are moving to cell phone only households. Among Muslim Americans, in 2008, it made up 22% of our sample. So by excluding cell phone only households, you're really excluding a big chunk of the population. So those are the two new and what makes this study really groundbreaking and very special.
Just to ask a quick question. Out of the
Sure.
300,000, how many ended up being Muslim households?
I knew you were going to ask me that.
Sorry, yeah.
Now, of course, I'll tell you, our sample size is 946. But we say this very clearly in the methodology, we do, as an organization, caution against trying to count people using polling. It's not meant for that. It's not a tool meant for counting numbers of people. It's meant for understanding the makeup and the attitudes of a group. And so counting Muslims using polling can be problematic for several reasons. But we at least as an organization are not putting out a number of how many Muslims there are, because we don't think that polling is the right tool. So.
Okay. So who are these?
Who are Muslim Americans?
946 people?
Well, the President Barack Obama, in his inaugural speech, called our nation a nation of Christians and Muslims, Jews and Hindus, and said that our patchwork heritage was a source of strength. And so, what follows is that every individual in our country contribute something. And so Muslim Americans are simply no exception. What is it that they might contribute? What makes them unique? What do they have to offer in terms of enriching our society? Well, first, it's their racial diversity. Muslim Americans are the most racially diverse religious community in America. In fact, they have no majority race. The largest group are African Americans, who make up 35% of the total Muslim American population. They're also young. They're the youngest, the highest percentage of young people of any group. So roughly a third are between the ages of 18 and 29. Muslim Americans are educated. They're, in fact, after Jewish Americans, the most educated religious group in America. 40% of them have a college degree or above. And that trend also applies to Muslim women, who are at least as likely as Muslim men to have a college degree. Muslim Americans are productive, so they are employed. At least as likely as the general public, slightly more likely, simply because they're young, to be employed. So we don't have a lot of retired Muslim Americans. Most of them are either in school or working. They tend to work in professional jobs. So 30% are doctors, lawyers, engineers, compared to 26% of the general public, slightly more likely to be in a professional job. And many of them are also self-employed, so they're entrepreneurial. 24% say that they own their own business, and that compares to 17% in the general public. Muslims also give in charity. This is a religious tenet, and 70% of Muslims say that they have given to a public charity, and that is slightly higher than the general public at 64%, but Americans in general are a very generous population in terms of giving to charity. Their political ideology is very diverse, and so this was perhaps one of the surprises of our findings. Unlike Mormons, where the majority call themselves conservative, Muslim Americans are evenly divided sort of across the political spectrum, and they are the second most likely after Jewish Americans to call themselves liberal. I didn't mention this in the beginning, the comparison groups that we looked at were Protestants, Catholics, Mormons, and Jews as the other American religious communities that we're comparing to. And they are the second most likely to classify themselves as liberal. Now, those are sort of the assets that they offer society.
Okay, so based on your polling, what did you find were the challenges that the Muslim American community faces, both as a community but in relation to other community groups in the United States?
Well, that's a great question. There is a lot that Muslim Americans can contribute to fully unlock the potential. However, we have to address some of the challenges that this community is facing, which we uncovered in our research. The first challenge is that despite being highly educated, Muslim Americans are less likely to report or to be classified as thriving. Their emotional well-being and their life satisfaction is actually slightly lower than it is for other Americans. So we have an index that we simply call the thriving scale. And the way that you get classified into one group or another is simply by answering two questions about how you rate your life today and how you expect your life to be in 5 years. And so it's current and then optimism into the future. And Muslim Americans are less likely than the general public to be classified as thriving. So 41% classifies thriving compared to 46% of the general public. That's not really that significant, but when you look at young people, it's when it becomes, when it seems to be more of an issue. Muslims between the age of 18 and 29, young Muslims, are significantly less likely than their age peers, than other young people, to be classified as thriving. And so there's this youth bonus that is missing in the Muslim American community. So among Protestants, 61% of young Protestants are classified as thriving, 69% of young Jews, and only 40% of young Muslims. And so there is a significant difference, especially among young people. Another challenge is Muslim Americans lag behind in political participation. So while the majority say that they're registered to vote, they are significantly less likely than other faith communities to report being registered to vote. Only 64% of them say that they're registered to vote, compared to 90% of Protestants, 90% of Jews, 82% of Mormons. Another interesting finding that could present a challenge is that Muslim Americans are the least likely religious community we examine to identify with a specific political party. So during the campaign last year, I remember reading several times that Muslim Americans were staunch Democrats. They're actually not. Only 49% of them say that they're Democrats. Now, only 8% say they're Republicans, so they're not Republicans either. But 37%, which is the highest of any group, just simply say they're independents. Now, there actually is some pretty interesting data around where they classify themselves, because most people who classify themselves as conservative also say they're Republicans. I mean, the majority of conservatives are also Republicans in our data, except with Muslim Americans. The majority of conservatives are not Republicans. So there's some potential there for the Republican Party to win over some Muslim Americans if they were to reach out and maybe change their rhetoric. Muslim Americans' monthly household income reflects the racial disparity of America as a whole. So that's another challenge that Muslim Americans really face, is they have the biggest disparity within the community in their socioeconomics and in their especially their income, and it falls exactly along racial lines. Now, what's interesting is that's not unique to the Muslim American community. That's actually a reflection of being American, because that same racially based economic disparity is seen in the general public exactly along racial lines. So there are many challenges that the community, or the communities, the various Muslim American communities, are still facing as they move into full integration in the United States.
That's very nice. You've done a good job of painting, I guess, a picture of, in essence, how the Muslim community is a cross-section of the American larger public. How do you feel like the Muslim experience relates to the larger picture in America? Is it unique to the Muslim community? Is it American experience? How would you categorize that?
I think what's really interesting about the Muslim American experience is that it is uniquely American and uniquely Muslim at the same time. I mean, the Muslim American makeup is nowhere else in the world. It can really only happen in America, that they are as diverse as they are, that that they come from so many different backgrounds. So a friend of mine was visiting me a few years ago from Egypt, and it happened to be Eid, the holiday after Ramadan, and so we went to a huge congregational prayer, and Muslims from all over the DC metro area were, of course, all there. And nothing about it seemed very striking to me, but I looked over and she was literally in tears, and she said, the last time I saw this kind of diversity was in Mecca. And I thought, that's really true, and it really doesn't exist anywhere else. So it is this uniquely American phenomena. But at the same time, no other community within America is that diverse. So there is also this aspect of it being a uniquely Muslim phenomena as well. And so I think it's an important group to continue to look at and to really see how they continue to evolve within the American story.
Well, that's definitely very important, also the follow-through of your research. And I know it's been picked up by a few academic sources and publications. What do you see as the long-term implications of such research? How do you hope that it will be used, and by whom?
I think that this research is important. First of all, it's just the beginning. We really see this as a foundational study. There's more questions. We've created more questions than we've answered, and so it is ongoing. But I hope that this study will be the foundation of a lot of things about first how reporters report on Muslim Americans, who are their representatives when they go and try to talk to people who are supposed to be representing the community. Oftentimes African Americans are completely not present when Muslim Americans are being reported on, even though they're the largest group. So that's one thing, is it just sheds light on who these people really are. Not only news reporting, but media, in terms of creative media, Hollywood, can get a richer, more nuanced picture of what the community's like. Policymakers, in trying to think about how does one tap into the potential of this community. How does this community get seen as a brain trust in solving global problems? I am hoping that this report can be a resource for those kinds of discussions.
Have you felt like there was any challenges in getting the report out there to date? I know you guys have had very positive feedback, but have there been challenges in trying to get it out? Well,
I think the biggest challenge is just simply conducting the study. I mean, the study was a huge effort. It did take a full year to get enough of a sample size, and that's a challenge in itself. Usually your field period is a week or 2 weeks, and when your field period is a whole year, now of course all of our comparison groups are also over a year, and so there are challenges in terms of, well, how did things change over a year? 2008 was a very turbulent year with a lot going on, and so that's just a technical challenge of just having such a wide lens and taking all of that data in and then looking at it that way.
Wonderful. I want to turn this slightly more personal. Now, you're the second, if I'm not mistaken, Muslim to be appointed to the White House faith-based and community initiatives initiative there. What type of feedback have you gotten, and what implications do you think that has, both domestically with the new administration and internationally, as we know that you did get positive feedback and you got picked up by a lot of international media outlets because of your recent appointment. So if you can reflect on that personally.
Well, it's interesting because, of course, we just started at the council, and I feel like I've gotten way more credit before I've actually done anything. So feeling a little guilty about that, because really, we haven't done anything yet. It's just the very beginning, just been appointed. But the Middle Eastern media has just been, to my incredible surprise, very, very receptive, and has really picked up the story of my appointment. So I was born in Egypt, so I wasn't surprised that, you know, maybe Egyptian media was interested, but in fact it seems to be wider than just Egypt. And really the whole issue, I mean, it's interesting what the stories and the way sort of they're framed is really quite positive for America, I think, because the way the stories are talked about, especially in the comment section, is focusing on my hijab, and, you know, the fact that a woman, a Muslim American woman, has been appointed onto this council, and she happens to wear hijab. The subtext is, of course, hijab is outlawed by law in most of these countries and in higher government offices. And so there's a very strong message that that, you know, there's a democracy here, and things are different. And I think that's a positive thing. There are people who are also taking it, even though, I mean, taking just this as another sign of sincerity on the part of the Obama administration, that they are interested in hearing the views of Muslims, and this idea of respecting Islam is sincere. So there's been a huge reaction, which I think is a positive thing for the prospects of building greater mutual respect. But I'm still anxious to actually get to work and make a difference.
Well, talking about you said you haven't done much. You've done absolutely amazing work, and I'm sure your research is definitely very helpful to a lot of people. So,
thank you.
So thank you to you on that. But I do think that what you said with regards to the symbolism and the fact that you're appointed as that has done a great deal following on Obama's, you know, reaching out to the Muslim world via Al Arabiya and then his trip to Turkey recently. What other type of, I guess, research do you guys plan on doing as a follow-up to this research, but then also with regards to shaping domestic policy towards how Muslims are categorized and how that policy in turn affects Muslim experience here in America?
Well, we continue to do this research. We are about to come out with a major study on Muslims in Europe in May, which will launch out of London, our London office in Gallup. And then we're hoping to get our newest research on Muslim majority countries out early fall, and really look at has anything really changed or not. And I'm very excited to see the answer to that question. I really don't know what to expect. So we will continue to do our research, and our mission at Gallup, and it always has been, is to inform leaders with the wisdom of the people. And so Dr. Gallup, when he started our company, he basically started it with a simple premise that if democracy is about the will of the people, someone should go find out what that will is. And that's really what we've been doing for 70 years, and now have just taken that to a much wider scale.
When did the Muslim Studies department actually begin at Gallup?
It was late 2005 is when we started this.
Was it a result of the lack of attention or the lack of knowledge, you feel?
Well, our CEO tells this story that's almost become a legend at Gallup, but he says that he was watching a news conference, and Rumsfeld was asked, it was right after 9/11, and Rumsfeld was asked, how do Muslims feel about the attacks? And his response was, well, I don't know. It's not like you can take a Gallup poll. And so that was when Jim decided we gotta take a Gallup poll, and we went into 9 predominantly Muslim countries in early 2002. In fact, we started even late 2001 and did the beginnings of our study of Muslims. And then in 2005, we dramatically expanded that to cover the entire world, which would cover, in our research, 90% of the global Muslim population. So the inception was this idea that leaders have no idea what these people are thinking, and yet we're so deeply involved. And Gallup felt that it had an important role to play.
I do have one question just that keeps popping in my mind. If you were to do similar research in, say, a Muslim country, do you think that people would be as frank and as open about their answers to your questions?
Well, that's a very good question. There's someone here who writes all about that, and the problems with polling in the Middle East. This is of course a challenge, and we recognize that it's a challenge, and we have ways that we try to lower mitigate this issue as much as we can. But really, at the end of the day, social desirability is not something exclusively exclusive to the Middle East or to the Muslim world, and we have to craft questions to get real answers from people all around the world. And we continue to do this research and believe that it is, like Winston Churchill said about democracy, the worst system except for every other system that's been tried. So, polling is not perfect, and we're the first to admit that. But done right and done robustly and scientifically, it's the best tool we have to understand populations and societies accurately.
And do you guys have any of your qualitative research published, or the quantitative? I know you guys have the charts and that sort of thing you could find online. What about the narratives? Did you guys collect narratives from people? We
didn't collect narratives on Muslim Americans because of just the nature of the study. It was every day, and it was for every American. So the study, especially since it's a phone study, has to be rather short. So no, we don't have narratives, but we do focus groups and other qualitative research to help us understand our quantitative research. You're saying that Muslims have short attention spans? Americans have short attention spans. Well, thank you so much. That's definitely very insightful, and thank you all for the research. And if you don't mind, we can open up the floor to some Q&A. I would like to ask you all to stand and hold the mic close to your mouth, please, and announce yourself when you ask questions. So, do I see a mic floating around?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
No.
Thank you.
Just go ahead.
Just a second, please.
Try again.
Practice.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll just shout. My name's Dave Pollack. Thank you very much. I'm from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and thank you very much, Dalia, for a really, really interesting and important presentation. I wanted to just ask if you have any additional information you can share about the demographic makeup of American Muslims. You mentioned, I think, that African Americans are 35% of the total, and who are the others?
Who are the others?
Do you have that by national ancestry or other categories, or what? Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to answer that, but I do want to just put out there that the entire report is available to download for free at the website muslimwestfacts.com. And you can click on the link and you can download the entire report, and you can also watch the press conference and see all the media coverage of the report. So the question is, what are the other groups? And let me explain how we did it. We did not, like I said, because of the nature of the study, we asked the sort of conventional race question. We didn't ask more of what you might expect in a purely Muslim study, where you're asking people where they're from or they're Arab or whatever. We just did sort of the conventional race categories. So 35% are African American, 28 are white, 18 are Asian, and 18 are other. In addition, 1% are Latino, Hispanic Muslims. Now, the question is often, well, where are the Arabs? You know, which category are they in? And most studies have found that, who've asked people the conventional version and the sort of more detailed version, that the vast majority of Arabs do classify themselves as white, and that is their official classification in the census is under white. So 28%, but that would also include not only Arabs, but Bosnians, Kosovos, white Americans who convert to Islam. So that's that group. Turks, of course, yes, Turks, of course. Iranians, yeah, Iranians.
How did you guys quantify, I guess, or qualify youth? Because you brought up some statistics about
18,
youth.
it was just 18 to 29 was our definition of the age.
And then the same brackets were
For across the groups,
board.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't want to.
Maria
Do you wanna
Mariani
moderate?
from Georgetown University Center, Language Education and Development. How do you, in your research, do you look at your answers based on the African American Islam or Muslims and how they answer the question versus everyone else? Because I would think that they would have a different twist on things and the way they look at issues.
Mhm.
And do you
Absolutely. Well, they're not, well, they do have a different view, but they're actually not totally unique. So we actually, one of the chapters in the report is a racial breakdown. So we compare white, African American, Asian, and other as the 4 groups on all the questions. So you can actually see how they differ from each other, and then how they differ from their racial counterparts in the general public. So we actually have all of that in there. And African Americans are different in some ways, and in some ways they're very similar. So socioeconomically, they are on the lower end of the spectrum. But so, for example, African American and Asian Muslims are on opposite ends of the spectrum. Asian American Muslims are the most affluent, African Americans are the least affluent. But then when you look at a measure like religiosity, they're exactly the same. They're both very high in that. Interestingly, when you look at thriving or well-being, African Americans are on the lower end, but actually they're equal to white Muslims. Very interesting. White and black Muslims are both quite low, and Asian and other Muslims are a little better. So the data on with the racial breakdowns is quite informative, I think.
Thank you. My name is Sonay Kamber. I'm with the Assembly of Turkish American Associations. Thank you very much for the for your lecture. My question is more related to policy implications of your survey, or political implications, let's say. Now, the findings of your survey demonstrate that this is a very diverse group, and there are actually Islams in the United States, not only one Islam, because all these groups interpret Islam in a different way, and they go to different mosques. Mm-hmm. They have different groups. And for instance, in Germany, there is a similar initiative, faith-based initiative, which is called the Islamic Conference, and it is such a controversial issue whom to invite to this conference. And the German government is most of the time very much puzzled. So my question is, how within this diversity, how can we manage to become a united voice, considering that being unified is very important to have an impact on American society and politics? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think that you made quite a number of points. So I think one of your points was that people are interpreting Islam in different ways in America, which is of course true, but that doesn't necessarily follow along racial lines. So, there are just different interpretations or different ideologies that exist in America. That's one thing. The other thing is, with such diversity, how are people going to unite to make an impact? I think the biggest, I mean, it's going to continue to be a challenge, but I would just think about it in another way. If we look at Christianity, or the Christian faith, or the Protestant faith, or even evangelicals, they have their own racial diversity, I mean, at least black and white, and they're no more united, really, than Muslims. I mean, if you look at, the idea that Sunday at 10 o'clock is the most segregated hour of the week, that actually doesn't tend to be so much the case of mosques, especially in towns where, smaller cities where there aren't that many Muslims. Actually, all the mosques I've ever attended, because I've always lived in medium-sized cities, have been incredibly diverse. So the division within the Muslim community, I think sometimes is rather exaggerated, or it's seen in a way that other faith communities aren't looked at in the same way. So evangelicals aren't really racially united in many cases. There is a racial division, just as there is in the Muslim American community. But this idea of how will there be political mobilization, I mean, I don't think I have a good answer for you. I would just say that the main issue is really around priorities. And for a long time, there was a division along not really racial lines, but more priority lines, where some groups were focused on social justice and poverty in America, and others were very focused on foreign policy. And I think it's only by integrating those two priority lists that people can come together on one platform to make an impact.
Do I see the mic floating around, or are you just holding it? Does anyone else have any? No, the mic's over there. I just wondered if you have any more questions. No more questions? Well, do you have any last follow-up points before we?
I want to end by talking a little bit about how Muslim Americans are a uniquely American phenomena, or the uniquely American experience, by talking a little bit about what they actually share with other Americans as well. One thing that they share is around the value of faith. And so Muslim Americans, like other Americans, are highly religious. So they resemble Protestants and Mormons in their level of religiosity. They also are similar to other Americans in women's employment. So in the Muslim American community, nearly 60% of women work, and that's similar to 55% of women in the general public. They attend religious services in there's a similar trend. So 41% of Muslims attend a religious service at least once a week, and that's similar to, it's actually exactly the same as Protestants, at exactly 41% as well. Women and men attend in equal percentages, which is similar to other faith communities in the United States. Quite different, though, from the pattern you might see in some Middle Eastern countries. So, for example, in Egypt, women are significantly less likely than men to attend mosque on a weekly basis. Whereas Muslim Americans are slightly lower in their percentage of being classified as thriving than other Americans, 41% overall versus 46%. They are significantly more likely to be thriving than Muslims in other Western countries. For example, in Britain, the percentage of Muslims who are classified as thriving is only 7%. So in many ways, despite their obstacles, Muslim Americans are just that, Americans, and really reflect the nation's strengths as well as its struggles.
Wow. Well, we're a very intensely diverse audience. I think we have another question. Oh, go ahead.
Jan, Ruby Forum. My question is about Mr. Rumsfeld's question.
Mm-hmm.
After this poll, do we know how the Muslim Americans feel about the attacks?
We don't know what Muslim Americans feel about the attacks because we've never asked them. But we do know how Muslims felt about the attacks around the world. And the majority simply said it was morally unjustified.
Just to clarify, you guys are talking about the attacks on 9/11.
9/11, yeah.
Okay, because I heard some additional questions out there. Do you, another question. I have all these questions. It's great research. I just want to dissect it and use it in everyday life. How do you guys, long term, do you guys plan on, I guess, following on one of the questions of one of the audience members, on dissecting self-identification within Islam? So taking that same data and then categorizing it by categories of how people self-identify, whether it's Sunni, Shia, those sorts of things.
Well, it would be difficult to do mostly because the sample size would just have to be enormous to be able to do anything significant when you are cutting the community even further down in terms of different ideological or interpretive schools of thought. So that would be more difficult to do. But what I hope to do more of is look at demographics in a little bit more detail, background, where do people come from? Are people first generation, second generation? Looking at maybe in greater detail. The other issue with sect identification is actually most studies have found that most Muslims don't identify with a sect or don't want to identify with a sect, even in places that might seem very sectarian in nature. They're kind of careful to say, I'm just a Muslim.
What do you think that's attributed to?
Well, I mean, I think it's attributed to the desire for Muslims to be one united community. It doesn't always play out that way, but that is the desire, I think, among most Muslims. When we ask Muslims, for example, around the world, what can Muslims do to help themselves? One of the most frequent responses is be more united.
As an American community?
Oh, this is around the world, actually. Okay. I mean, in all parts of the world, even in communities that are a sectarian minority, like in Iran, that's what they say. Muslims should be more united. I mean, everywhere. It's not even unique to one part of the world. It's very interesting that that's a striking, reoccurring theme in the data.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Just to end on one quote, it reminds me of this: is diversity is the art of thinking independently together. So I think that sums up the Muslim American experience. We want to thank you so much for being with us, and thank you all for joining us today. And that concludes our show for today. Thank you.